Today is October 4th, 2020. Yesterday I did a recording on the mass debate and was discussing a disagreement I had with someone about the mandate, and was focusing on the logical fallacy of appeal to authority as being the main fallacy that's being utilized. This morning I was reading more on logical fallacies and just reviewing some notes of mine, and realized there was a couple other logical fallacies that came up in the disagreement that I mentioned in the previous audio. And I think it's important to become familiar with logical fallacies and be able to recognize them when they arise, because they're behind false beliefs which are behind destructive actions, right? So it's really key to be able to recognize them. So along with the appeal to authority, which I covered in the previous audio, there was a couple other things that were said to me in the disagreement that I was referring to in the last audio, but also actually came up to me in previous occasions with other people saying the same thing. And I hadn't, at the time, been well versed enough in logical fallacies to be able to just point it out at that moment, but I can do that now, and I think it would be of benefit to others who are trying to avoid a more dystopian world based on irrationality. So one of the other things that was said to me was, it's not a medical device, it's just a mask. So this was said to me in response to me saying, well, I don't think it's right for other people to be able to prescribe, a medical device for myself as a preventative measure, against my will. I don't think I should be able to do that to anyone else. I don't think anyone should be able to do that for me. And the immediate objection that I received in the disagreement that I've been focusing on, but also in others that I've had with people, is they would just immediately say, well, it's not a medical device, it's just a mask. And then I would reply, well, it's a device, it's a apparatus, it's a thing, an object, or however you want to call it, that is being used for a medical purpose, right? The whole point of the mandate is that it's supposed to be preventing a spread of an illness, right? So that's a medical purpose, right? It's for the purpose of achieving a medical aim, right? So, I mean, it clearly is being utilized as a medical device. I know normally, we wouldn't use such formal language as medical device for something like a mask, but, in a hospital setting, that's what it's being used for, right? It's a medical device that's used by doctors and nurses and so on. I don't see how that's an inaccurate label. It's certainly not just a mask. I mean, what does that mean? It's just a mask. It's like saying it's like, oh, well, it's just like a T-shirt, or it's like a scarf, or like it's nothing, and it's not equivalent to any other article of clothing. It's obviously meant for a medical reason, right? And that's what they even, clearly state the reason is for, right? To prevent the spread of an illness. So, so when that counter argument was given to me, oh, well, it's not a medical device, because if it was a medical device, my argument would have more weight. So that rather than address the fact that, oh yeah, it's true, we shouldn't be able to do medical procedures or put medical devices on people who haven't hurt anybody, or don't have any signs of illness against their will, because that's more clearly true, that's more clearly a rational and ethical stance. They just say, well, it's not even a medical device, it's just a mask, which is false, right? Because it's not just a mask, it's a medical device, and it's important to recognize that that's what it's being utilized as, because there are other things that could then fall under the category of medical device. And so once you're accepting the premise that the state can coerce and force people to use medical devices against their will, that can then turn into other medical devices, right? That could be, or whatever other medical intervention, right? That's the premise that's being set. So it's important to recognize it's not just a mask. They're not just saying, oh, it's Mask Mondays. Everybody's got to wear a mask just because we think masks are cool. That's not what's going on. So what logical fallacy, I believe this is, if I'm referencing my books here on logical fallacies correctly, is it's a form of equivocation. And the reason why I believe it fits that particular fallacy is, as I grab my book here, is that it has to do with a ambiguity of terminology, right? So they're utilizing an ambiguous term to support their argument, right? If it wasn't so ambiguous, then their argument would fall apart. So by saying it's just a mask, like keeping it ambiguous, keeping it unclear as to the truth that it's actually a medical device in this context. So it's definitely a logical fallacy to say it's just a mask, it's not a medical device. All right, the other logical fallacy that came up in this disagreement was when I was saying that, this is problematic because it could lead to further medical intervention, like as I was just saying. And the response I got from that was, oh, that's, I think you're paying attention to too much conspiracy theories. That's really dark, and I don't think there's any chance that this could lead to a vaccine. No one's going to do that, or no one's going to accept that. And I said, well, I'm glad to hear that you're so confident that there's no way that this could escalate to further violence towards the population, further violation of people's bodily autonomy and the right to own and control their own bodies. But I said there actually has been reports, that there is talk and, actual serious discussion and considerations and, even like, policy kind of development or however you want to phrase it, that there is has actually been discussion from, what you would call, I guess, mainstream sources, talking about things like proof of vaccination or vaccine ID or, vaccine certification or, things like that. And so I said, well, it's not really that far-fetched. It's not like I'm just pulling this out of thin air. Like there has actually been talk of there being proof of vaccination requirements coming down the line for the ability to travel and so on and so forth, to go into certain institutions or buildings or whatever. Instead of a mask being required, it's gonna become proof of vaccination, right? So I said it's not complete conspiracy theory. I think it's actually a possibility. I'm not saying I know for certain that it's going to happen, but it's a possibility. And I don't think it's completely unreasonable to say that there's nobody out there that considers this a possibility, or there's nobody out there that wants this to be a possibility, namely pharmaceutical corporations or people that have stock in vaccine corporations. They would love A lot of them would probably love for there to be a mandate for vaccines, right? Because it'd be extremely profitable. So, it's not a ridiculous idea, being that it has been discussed through mainstream sources and also just common sense, right? That it would be extremely profitable for people for that mandate to exist. And so what reasoning is that when, or, what fallacy is that when they tell, that I'm leading to, which is, after I pointed that out, that, hey, this isn't just a, wild conspiracy theory, the response I got was, well, even if it does lead to a vaccine mandate, further restrictions on your travel or your ability to survive, right? Like you can't buy or sell without this certificate or whatever. Well, that's just out of your control. So at first my point was dismissed as just being, ridiculous conspiracy theory. But then when I pointed out, well, it wasn't that ridiculous, they then shifted their counter argument to be, well, even if that does happen, I guess, we just got to go along with it, it's just out of our control. So that's also a logical fallacy, right? Because it's not addressing the point that I'm making, which is that this is ethically unsound, right? That this is further escalation of bodily control and invasion. And so the logical fallacy that I believe this is an example of is circular reasoning, right? Even if it does lead to a mandate, well, it's out of your control. It's like, okay, well, it's a mandate, That's basically the argument that was being presented to me, like, well, mandates are out of your control, so there you go. Like, that's not actually a counter argument, telling me, well, if that's what they decide to do, if they decide to make vaccines mandatory, well, it's out of your control. It's like, well, okay, you're just defining what a mandate is, right? A mandate is something that isn't voluntary, right? Like, it's not optional, right? It's a mandate. Therefore, yes, that's the definition of a mandate, is that it's supposed to be something out of your control, right? It's mandatory. It's not optional. So therefore, out of your control. So they're just repeating themselves, right? And that's circular reasoning. So yeah, these are two more logical fallacies that are being circulated in defense of the mask mandate: the equivocation and circular reasoning on top of appeal to authority. And what I find really interesting is that even after pointing out these logical fallacies, a lot of people just dismiss them completely as if they're irrelevant, and that shows that they aren't actually interested in what the truth is. They aren't actually interested in, like, what is rational. They're not being scientific about it. They're not saying, well, whatever is most logical and most fact-based is what I'm going to agree with. They're saying, well, I don't care if your reasoning is sound. I'm just going to do this circular reasoning back to my, preconceived conclusion that my view is correct and you're wrong, no matter what you say, no matter what facts you present, or no matter what logic you put forward. And that's, what I'm encountering a lot too, is that even after you point out these logical fallacies, a lot of times people still won't listen because they don't actually have an objective stance. They're not actually looking at this, like I said, from a scientific perspective of, I want to discover what's most true and logical and go with that. It's, because if they were, should be able to recognize, okay, you did point out some fallacies here, and you did point out some facts that are contradicting my previous argument. And so, yeah, I see that I need to let go of my previous argument because it's not holding up to scrutiny. But they don't have that willingness, right? They just want to throw these labels, and go usually back to another logical fallacy of ad hominem, which is just, throwing insults. Oh, this is just, anyone who believes this is just a crazy conspiracy theorist or something like that. So they just revert back to their fallacies and, appeal to emotion and the rest of it. So, if I'm able to point out logical fallacies here, within an argument for a mandate, If you're currently for the mandate, you shouldn't just disregard that as irrelevant, because it's not. Your perspective should be based on sound reasoning. It shouldn't be based on appeal to authority. It shouldn't be based on equivocation. It's just a mask. It shouldn't be based on circular reasoning. Well, a mandate is out of your control. It shouldn't be based on, well, the experts said so we should just do what they say. Appeal to authority. Like, if these are elements of your argument, it's not actually a solid argument, no matter how attached to it you are, or how many people around you agree with you, and it doesn't matter. Every time you turn on the news, they're agreeing that this is the perspective they're pushing, and I'm just this, lone voice, out there that you never heard before, and like, who the heck is this guy? It doesn't matter. What matters is what's actually rational, what's actually following sound reasoning, and what's actually fact-based. And like I pointed out here, a lot of people defending the mandate are just utilizing various logical fallacies. And that's pointing out that actually this isn't a good thing going on. And like I said, to start with, logical fallacies are used to support destructive beliefs and destructive actions, right? That's how we get bad things going on in the world that wouldn't otherwise have happened if people weren't following the bad reasoning that supported them. So I hope this further explanation of fallacies involved with the so-called lockdown going on here in the year 2020 was valuable to you. Thanks for listening.